Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank first the representative of the government for giving what I felt was a very informative representation of the government's stance on this issue, which I think will bring us all closer to coming to an agreement on this bill. Now, first I'd like to tackle a couple of the very valid concerns that the government has raised that perhaps have not yet been addressed. One issue that was raised quite some time back in this discourse was the issue of tax breaks. The idea that perhaps we could help fund or help cushion the cost of setting up all this infrastructure for the companies that are willing to come on board. Perhaps, and while the government has raised some very salient points about why this might be unfeasible or impractical, perhaps I should explain the rationale behind it so that we all can have a clearer picture of why the opposition put this forth. Now, used oil refining is, as I think we all understand, a very new industry. And with every new industry, there are a lot of costs, risks, and a lot of factors that go into its startup. And we feel that this might perhaps be one of the reasons why companies such as Alpha Biofuels have not come forth and done this on a large scale yet. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to give incentives, encourage companies to come forth and to join us in hopefully creating a system where we can get something out of this used oil that is being thrown away and needlessly wasted all the time. So we encourage the government to perhaps propose an alternative form of incentive that might entice these companies to come along and help the government out in this initiative if we were not to move forward with tax breaks. Now, one other thing that was mentioned was the idea that refineries might perhaps be a hazard in terms of accidents and, dare I say it, even terrorism, considering that these refineries and collection centers will be areas where vast amounts of oil will be held. Well, aside from the underground fuel tank plan that one of the representatives of the opposition earlier mentioned, we certainly intend to perhaps create these collection centers away from major residential districts, and yet we can certainly look into creating one in every district, but perhaps somewhere in the outskirts or in a more outlying area so as to minimize the risk. And obviously these areas will be accorded good security and the buildings will be hardened against attack. And we will make sure that this will not be like just a pile of barrels standing in the middle of nowhere. No, this will be done properly because we see a lot of potential in this if this bill moves forward. And I understand that the government also sees issue with provisions of authority that we have given this committee. Again, let me first explain the intent behind why we decided to give this committee so much clout in its decision making. You see, again, with a new industry, as mentioned before, we would like to make sure that we can keep checks on things such as quality. After all, diesel is a very often used commodity, and if there were to be a failure in the refining process, that could be catastrophic for the industries and a lot of the other areas in the island that require the fuel. So the idea behind giving them such authority is basically to try and secure this new industry and give it a stronger sense of, and give us a better sense of control over where this refining process is going. However, let me make it clear that it was never our intent to stunt the growth of the economy or to limit the economy in any way. I'm sure one thing that all members of the House here today can agree on is that Singapore needs to be on the cutting edge of the economy to move ahead in such a competitive world. We are a small island with very, very little resources in terms of water, natural resources, raw materials, and things like that. And one of the only things we have to rely on are our own brains. So we have to be smart here. And I think everyone can, and this leads me on conveniently to my next point. I think everyone can see that fuel obviously is, as I mentioned before, a commodity. This is something that sells and sells fast. And in a world where there can only be less and less fossil fuel as it is non-renewable, something like biodiesel has the potential to revolutionize the fuel industry globally. And this, being on the cutting edge, being on the cusp of a new technology, gives Singapore the advantage. It puts the ball in our court, and it gives us so much potential. This bill has so much potential to go beyond our shores, to go overseas, to make us a technological titan in this field, as we are in so many other fields as well. And one other thing that I'd like to mention that I think bears saying is that if the government is worried about issues such as biodiesel compatibility, I assure them that this will not be an issue, because biodiesel is actually compatible, or rather the biodiesel that is created through this process specifically is actually compatible with most fleets of diesel-compatible cars. And in that sense, it shouldn't be a problem shifting to this new system. And for all these reasons, I urge the House to come to an agreement with the amendments that we could make and push this bill forward for the good of Singapore and even our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.